اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم. تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون. لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون. إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون. وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون. وسواء عليهم أأنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون. إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم. إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين. واضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم اثنين فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون. قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون. قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين. قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم ولمسنكم منا عذاب أليم. قالوا طائركم معكم أئن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون. وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لو يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون. وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون. أأتخذ من دونه آلهة إن يردنا الرحمن بالضر لا تغني عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا هم ينقذون. إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين. إني آمنت بربكم فاسمعون. قيل ادخل الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين. وما أنزلنا على قومهم من بعد من جند من السماء وما كنا منزلين. إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم خامدون. يا حسرة على العباد ما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون. ألم يروا كم أخلقنا قبلهم من القرون أنهم إليهم لا يرجعون. وإن كل لما جميع لدينا محضرون. وآية لهم الأرض الميتة أحييناها وأخرجنا منها حبا فمنه يأكلون. وجعلنا فيها جنات من نخيل وأعناب وفجرنا فيها من العيون ليأكلوا من ثمره وما عملت أيديهم أفلا يشكرون. سبحان الذي خلق الأزواج كلها مما تنبت الأرض ومن أنفسهم ومما لا يعلمون. وآية لهم الليل نسلك منه النهار فإذا هم مظلمون. والشمس تجري لمستقر لها ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم. والقمر قدرناه منازل حتى عاد كل أرجون القديم. لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر ولا الليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون. وآية لهم أنا حملنا ذريتهم في الفلك المشحون وخلقنا لهم من مثله ما يركبون. وإن نشاء نغرهم فلا صريخ لهم ولهم ينقذون إلا رحمة منا ومتاعا إلى حين. وإذا قيل لهم اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم لعلكم ترحمون. وما تأتيهم من آية من آيات ربهم إلا كانوا عنها معرضين. وإذا قيل لهم أنفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا أنطعم من لو يشاء الله أطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين ويأكلون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين ما ينظرون إلا صيحة واحدة تأخذهم وهم يخصمون فلا يستطيعون توصية ولا إلى أهلهم يرجعون ونفخ في الصور فإذا هم من الأجداث إلى ربهم ينسلون قالوا يا ويلنا من بعثنا من مرقدنا هذا ما وعد الرحمن وصدق المرسلون إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم جميع لدينا محضرون فاليوم لا تظلم نفس شيئا ولا تجزون إلا ما كنتم تعملون إن أصحاب الجنة اليوم في شغل فاكهون هم وأزواجهم في ظلال على الأرائك متكئون لهم فيها فاكهة ولهم ما يدعون سلام قولا من رب رحيم وامتازوا اليوم أيها المجرمون ألم أحد إليكم يا بني آدم ألا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين وأن اعبدوني هذا صراط مستقيم ولقد أزل منكم جبيلا كثيرا أفلم تكونوا تأكلون هذه جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اصلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون ولو نشاء لمسنا على أعينهم فاستبقوا الصراط فأنا يبصرون ولو نشاء لمسكناهم على مكانتهم فما استطاعوا مزيا ولا يرجعون ومن نؤمره ننخس في الخلق أفلا يأكلون وما علمناه الشهر وما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا ويحق الكون على الكافرين أولم يروا أنا خلقنا لهم مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها مالكون وذللناها لهم فمنها ركوبهم ومما يأكلون ولهم فيها منافع ومشارب أفلا يشكرون واتخذوا من دون الله أحلية لهم ينصرون لا يستطيعون نصرهم وهم لهم جند مهترون فلا يحزنك قولهم إنا نعلم ما يسرون وما يعلنون أولم يرى الإنسان أنا خلقنا من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين وضرب لنا مثلا وسع خلقا قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحيي الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو الخلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول لهم كن فيكون وسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون. الفاتحة.
وآل محمد صلوات. आ जाओ چاند میرے تیرے پیاس میں بجھاؤں ہنس گئی میں تیری ماں ہوں میرے لادل کہاں ہو میرے لادل کہاں ہو سینے تمہیں لگاؤں ہنس گئی میں تیری ماں ہوں آ جاؤ چاند میرے تیرے پیاس میں بجھاؤں ہنس گئی میں تیری ماں ہوں بیٹا تمہارا قاتل میرے سامنے کھڑا ہے جانے کیوں ہنس رہا ہے چادر بھی لٹ چکی ہے منہ کس طرح چھپاؤں ہنس گئی میں تیری ماں ہوں آ جاؤ چاند میرے تیرے پیاس میں بجھاؤں ہنس گئی میں تیری ماں ہوں تیرے جھولا کو سکینہ رو رو کے چومتی ہے تجھے گھر میں ڈھونڈتی ہے تیری موت کی خبر میں کیسے اسے سناؤں ہنس گئی میں تیری ماں ہوں آ جاؤ چاند میرے تیرے پیاس میں بجھاؤں ہنس گئی میں تیری ماں ہوں نیزے سے گر رہا ہے ننھا سا سر تمہارا دل روتا ہے ہمارا میرے ہاتھ تو بندھے ہیں سر کس طرح اٹھاؤں ہنس گئی میں تیری ماں ہوں آ جاؤ چاند میرے تیرے پیاس میں بجھاؤں ہنس گئی میں تیری ماں ہوں جب رات ہوگی رن میں ہو جائے گا اندھیرا درنا نہیں بیٹا دادی کہیں گی تم سے میں تجھے سلاؤں ہنس گئی میں تیری ماں ہوں آ جاؤ چاند میرے تیرے پیاس میں بجھاؤں تم رات کو ہمیشہ سنتے تماس لوری، اب نیند آتی ہوگی پھر گود میں لٹا کر ناد علی سناؤں، اس گھر میں تیری ماں ہوں، آ جاؤ چاند میرے تیرے پیاس میں بجھاؤں، اس گھر میں تیری ماں ہوں، میرے لادل کہاں ہو، میرے لادل کہاں ہو، سینے تمہیں لگاؤں، اس گھر میں تیری ماں ہوں، آ جاؤ چاند میرے تیرے پیاس میں بجھاؤں، اس گھر میں تیری ماں ہوں۔ پر محمد وآل محمد صلوات۔ رحم اللہ من قرأ سورة الفاتحة۔
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Sayyid Hasan Rizvi, respected elders, dearest brothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum jameen wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Surah Fatiha is requested for all marhumin listed on the screen, as well as all other marhumin. Surah Mubarak al-Fatiha. Dua Shfa Mary's is requested for all those in need here and elsewhere, as well as those listed on the screen. Let us recite together. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء 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 أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء. Ya Allah. Let us now invite Sayyid Hasan Rizvi to come forward for tonight's majlis by Muhammad wa Muhammad salawat.
رحم الله من قرأ الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين شفيع المذنبين رحمة للعالمين سيدنا والنبينا وحبيب قلوبنا والشفيع نفوسنا والطبيب ذنوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد. ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، صلوات على محمد وعلى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. Mu'mineen, mu'minat, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman, Salamun alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Tonight, on the 26th of Rajab, we are commemorating the wafat of Hazrat Abu Talib ibn Abu Talib alayhi salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. When the ulama and speakers talk about the personality or any topic surrounding Abu Talib, usually there's two different types of subject matters that they entertain. One is, a historical discussion where they look at the various events that took place in his lifetime, most of which is filled with his fada'il, right? How he supported the Prophet, what he did, what he sacrificed for the message of Islam, how he raised the Prophet, what he had done there. So that's one style that we've normally heard. And more recently, the other style or type of lecture that we've now become more used to or kind of come to expect is more polemical discussions. Because it's now a recent phenomenon that people have now come, a small minority of Muslims have called the Iman of Abu Talib into question. So many speakers have taken this occasion to try to address that issue and prove and make the case that no, he was a Muslim and he did have Iman. So I'm not necessarily going to talk about either of those because I think they've been done enough. I'm hoping that you've heard these lectures and you've heard all the proofs, and it should be actually fairly obvious whether Shia or Sunni. And it is obvious for Shias that he had Iman, he was a Muslim. And some of us, we maybe want to engage some of the members of Ahl Sunnah, as far as why they don't believe Abu Talib had Iman, why don't you think he was a Muslim? And for us, if you look at our books, we put that aside. We want to be objective, we look at their books. The history of the life of Abu Talib is not disputed at all. The fada'il, what he did in terms of raising the Prophet, his status among Banu Hashim, his status among the Quraysh, what he did to protect the Kaaba and serve the Hujjaj who came. Every single thing he did in terms of raising the Prophet, sacrificing, all of this, spending time in the valley, being sanctioned. There's no debated point among historians, among Sunnis and Shias. All of this is there. So the history, if anybody who would dare to read it and bother reading it and putting two and two together, should be fairly obvious and clear. And that's why I say it's not even worth discussing and going through all these historical points because you know it, and anybody who opens a book will figure it out. We don't need to spend 20, 30 minutes talking about that. What perhaps might be a more important question for us to think about is, well, if it's so clear and undisputed, and it has been for centuries, and the majority of Muslims never had an issue before, then where did all this sort of doubt, or in some instances, hatred for Abu Talib come from? Where did it just pop up from out of nowhere? And why has it become an issue? And I'll say it controversially, if we really want to pinpoint where the issue comes from, then actually all the blame lies on Imam Ali. All of this hatred for Abu Talib, it's all Imam Ali's fault. Now, why is that the case? Inshallah, we'll explain if you can recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Certain actions, whether we're talking about our normal day-to-day life, like physical actions, or even the ahkam and the sharia, which obviously represent the physical actions, the things that we do in our daily lives, sometimes they have just short-term, short-lived effects. We do something and pretty much the effect is done and over with, that's it. But most of the time, every action we perform, especially if it's our shar'i duty, meaning we're doing something wajib or mustahab, or we end up doing something haram or makruh. These things have generational effects. And sometimes the generational effect is not just downward, meaning you perform something and then it continues on into your lineage. Sometimes even the ahkam, the way that they're designed, they relate a sort of upward vertical movement and a downward vertical movement. Now what do I mean? I think easiest example is the concept of mahramiyah. Somebody being mahram or ghair or non-mahram. When you and I are immediate, mahram would be parents. But then it goes to every single generation higher, right? Meaning your grandparents, and then great, and then as far as you go up, right? And then for obviously children, same thing applies, right? Your own children, and then grandchildren, and all these continue. And that whole line, generationally, all this ancestry, forward and backward, maintains this line of, hurma, meaning they're all mahram. And then of course you have siblings, and then nephews and nieces, and aunts and uncles that are blood related. The lines basically, they stay there. So there's this generational relationship. So many rulings have this sort of, upwards and downwards sort of reverberation. This is not just in terms of ahkam, it's in positive traits too. They say that the positive effects that we may engage in, right? We talk about sadaqah jariyah, right? We perform an action and they say it has an upward effect because let's say, for example, they have this one famous narration. I believe it comes from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. I'm not positive, but I believe it's narrated from him, that he says that when a child learns how to recite and say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, he said that that teacher, the reward that's given out from that, the positive sort of spiritual effect from that, just that effect, if that effect and that child were to end up in a qabristan, in a graveyard, and that effect were to be dispersed there, they said every single person, regardless of their background, would be forgiven in that graveyard. The reward of an ustad or a teacher teaching a Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, or a father or a mother teaching Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim to their child, and that child reciting it, this is how powerful the reward is. And they say that this reward continues upward generationally, right? Because that teacher or parent who's teaching their child, a lot of this fada'il and fadilat is coming from their parents, which in turn came from their parents, and it goes up generationally. So all of this sadaqah jariyah is going upwards, and likewise, when that child learns it, they will in turn start to teach it to their kids, and then it continues on. So upwards and downwards, this sort of positive ajr, thawab, positive energy, whatever you want to call it, it has these effects. Likewise, negativity, gunah, ma'asiyah has the same effect as well. And very specifically, some times of ma'asiyah and sin, or even akhlaqi traits have the same sort of effect. Very clearly, the reason I mentioned that Imam Ali perhaps is the cause of the hatred of Abu Talib is because of this famous hadith that's even reported in Sunni books, which is again narrated from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam. Rasulullah has reported to have said, and then there's separate narrations where Imam Ali relates this as well, where the Prophet had said, "La yuhibbuka illa mu'min." The Prophet tells Imam Ali, no person can love you and will love you except for a mu'min. But on the other side, وَلَا يَبْغَضُكَ إِلَّا مُنَافِقٌ. The only person that can have hatred for you in their heart is a munafiq. So when somebody displays and has and harbors a hatred or an envy or a jealousy towards Amir al-Mu'mineen, then this has an effect of nifaq on their hearts. And this is showing that they have nifaq in their hearts. And then we take this and we look at history and these individuals who harbor this hatred for Imam Ali, and now you can begin to piece together how this will connect back to Abu Talib. So the first time you really notice this outright hatred, now we go through history, the main idea that comes to our minds is of course the Umayyads. See, the Umayyads, now we're kind of fast forwarding in history. When they realized that in order for them to secure their power, the only way for them to do so is to make sure they can distance the ummah and themselves from the personality of Imam Ali. That was the only way they could do it. And this is where you begin to see, for example, Muawiyah, his propaganda campaign. All of his followers, his lineage, every single one of them, almost all of Sham, this propaganda machine and this campaign created this hatred for Imam Ali, this ignorance towards the personality of Amir al-Mu'mineen. And they realized that the only way then to really dismiss Imam Ali is we have to harbor this hatred, and any person that's associated with this personality, we also have to harbor hatred towards them as well. You see, because when there is this sort of grudge and hatred in somebody's heart, it's not a precise thing. Usually when we even might harbor hatred or a grudge towards somebody, we usually don't just look at that one person and say, I hate you, and then that's kind of it. We close the book. That power of having a grudge and bearing a grudge or harboring hatred towards somebody, it's so viral, to use that word. It's so contagious that it spreads, and that hatred spreads to other people who are related. Sometimes it may even occur to us, unfortunately, right? Unfortunately, we may have seen it, in front of us, where you see when siblings who are older, they have a dispute about something. The siblings fight. And then when they get older, let's say now they have families and they have kids, for some reason, those kids, meaning these cousins, now harbor hatred for one another as well. Because on one side, that one brother, for example, is saying, your chachu or your mom, whatever, this is how they are. You can't trust their kids as well. So they start spreading that hatred. And on the other side, they're doing the same thing. So it's, this like Romeo, Juliet, Montague, Capulet sort of thing. Like this family starting to hate each other because of some, simplistic, egotistical arguments that are held. That is the darkness, the contagious nature of hatred. Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib, alayhi salatu wasalam, has said, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Man zara' al-ihan hasada mihan. Whoever sows and creates this sort of hatred, they're going to reap tribulations and effects from it as well. And again, we've seen it in our lives too. It's very, very tough to contain that hatred. It's very tough to just limit it to one spot. When that hatred starts, and this is exactly what shaitan does, right? Other hadith say he rings this bell. He doesn't just grab one individual, he tries to get every single person he can involved in this system of hatred, right? We talk about systemic racism, systemic poverty. There's systemic hatred too. And this can happen, again, among siblings, it can among families, and in the case of the Arabs, it happened among clans and tribes. And that same thing continued onwards, right? I don't want to go through the whole history of how the Quraysh and all these, clans of Quraysh had all these, internal fights and things like that. But all of this kept continuing on. And the focal point for a lot of them was Amir al-Mu'mineen himself. Because, again, the Fala'il, nobody could deny it. It was impossible to. And during his lifetime, every single Fadila ended up in Imam Ali's hands. What could they do? They knew what was going to happen. They wanted to secure power and have their clan be the one in power. And then when Islam came about, then they realized, okay, well, it's Islam coming about, and with this person, they're a member of Banu Hashim, Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. With him there, they said, look, this is our way to secure power. We need to get close to him. So you see, this is where you see the munafiqeen, as we know them. They tried their best to get as close to the Prophet as possible. But the problem is, no matter how close they tried to get, they could never get as close as Ali. It was impossible. They were, in battle with the Prophet, but they would run away. Imam Ali was there, killing half of the army. They could, their real character came out, right? Every time the Imam would be appointed for something, to go lead an expedition or go send a message, be an ambassador for the Prophet, they'd say, yeah, we're going to join him too. The Prophet said, okay, Bismillah, go right ahead. But then when they saw the justice and adalat of the Imam, when, for example, the Imam would collect taxes from these different tribes that would come to Islam, on the way back from certain missions, they would say, look, we came with you, Ya Ali, so why don't we, split some of this stuff for ourselves too? He says, no, we're not touching this until we get ijazat and permission from Rasulullah. You can't just divide it like that. And they would say, look, we don't care who you are, we're going to divide it up. We came along with you because they were in this very, power-hungry, money-hungry mentality. We'll take what we want. So they'd take it. Imam Ali was fierce. He said, no, you better put that stuff back. So they put it all back. And what happened is, as soon as they came back to the Prophet, these guys complained to the Prophet. Like, your guy, this kid Ali is being too harsh. Tell him to calm down a little bit. He said no. And he started mentioning these things. The only person who can have these seeds of hatred and animosity and jealousy towards Ali is a munafiq. So you guys need to be careful. He's warning them, and again warning everybody else that, look, the seeds of hatred are being planted among these people right now. He was trying to show them, in a sense, indirectly, and we would say directly, that look, these individuals who are trying to join the army, to become a part of Islam, they don't really care about the message of Islam. They don't care about the mission. Their goal is power. Their goal is money. They're trying to control things. Pay attention to these factors because you're going to see it, come back later on. And what do we see? We see later on what happens during the lifetime of Imam Ali. The same individuals start to make campaigns and plans and try to remove Imam Ali from power, and they did what they could. And then what you see, as you continue as well, is it makes its way, again we're going now down the generations. When it comes to trying to support Imam Hasan, you see those same individuals are causing fitna and fasad in the army of Imam Hasan. And then the worst of all ends up when we see it in Karbala with Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. We know the history. We've heard the musibah a million times. Imam Hussein is trying his best to plead with them right in front of the army on that day of Ashura. Don't you know who I am? Don't you know my mother? Don't you know my grandfather? Don't you know my lineage? Do you not understand who I am? Don't you know that I am one of the youth of paradise? I'm the leaders of the youth of paradise. Why are you doing this? And they were very honest. They were honest haters, if you want to put it that way, right? They said, look, we know exactly who you are. We know your grandfather. We know your mother. We know your status. We know everything. But the problem is your father, Ali. We have so much hatred in our hearts for your father, Ali, because of what he's done, what he did to our ancestors in all these various battles, because of the fadail and the benefits that he got, the closest to the Prophet that he got that we couldn't get. Because of that hatred, we're going to kill you today. So these individuals became so blinded by that hatred. It passed down from generation to generation to generation, and it ended up like this, where they're ready to kill the grandson of the Prophet. That same mentality continued onwards into the, again, Umayyad Empire, to such a point where they said, look, in order for us, meaning the Umayyads, and some would even argue the Abbasids, in order for us to really secure our power, we can't just distance ourselves from some of these individuals like Imam Hussein. We can't just harbor hate for them. We need to not just come downwards generationally, we need to now show our hatred upward as well. Meaning the next person on our list is Abu Talib. If we're going to show hatred for the children of Ali, we have to show hatred towards the father of Ali as well. Because for them, the issue was, it wasn't just the, Imam Ali himself, it's every single thing that he stood for. All those personality traits, all those fada'il, all the sacrifices, which of course are descending and coming from Abu Talib. They said, it's impossible for us to secure our power if we are going to hate Imam Ali and express this outwardly, but not do this for Abu Talib. And this is where historians say, where you start to see all these ahadith, in the Sunni books at least, not our books of course, the Sunni ahadith that start to put doubt in the iman of Abu Talib, which say, we don't know if he recited the Shahadat in his last moments or not, or the Prophet didn't hear it. All these fake narrations basically, which even according to most Sunni schools, they said these are weak narrations, they're not strong, it's only one. Most of the schools threw it out. But again, planting that doubt was enough for them. And again, back then that media campaign was strong. So they say that these ahadith started to show up during this time of the Umayyads, and then some say the Abbasids strengthened it as well. They needed to create this propaganda campaign. Why? Again, if they wanted to extend that hatred, it can't just come down one way generationally, it had to go both ways. Not only the hatred towards the children of Ali, but also the father of Ali. This is the power of hatred. And it's all because at every step of the way, they could not handle the personality of Imam Ali. Every single point, whenever he wanted to do something, it was khilaf, going against every single thing he said. Constant arguments and debates with him. I mean, they did the same thing with the Prophet, but of course they did the same thing with Ali. And we have this hadith from Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam, who warns us against this same sort of trait. He says, Iyakum wal khusuma. He said, be careful of constantly bringing up these arguments and little disputes and quarreling over and over and over again. Why? فَإِنَّهَا تَغْشُلُ الْقَلْبِ. Because it will take over your heart. You'll be your heart will be dominated. You'll be obsessed with just debating and creating arguments and all this. You won't be able to talk or think about anything else. وَتُورِثُ النِّفَاقِ. The result of this is nifaq. You think that you'll be arguing for haqq. You'll be on the side of the truth. And I'm holding the banner of truth. No, you're not doing that. You're just arguing because of your ego. That's all you're doing now. وَتَكْسِبُ الضِّغَانِ. And this will bring about hatred and more hatred. I think I've given you my own personal example, which I'm not happy with, but it happened. This is almost 10 years ago, when somebody pointed out there was this, extremist, takfiri, Wahhabi, I think this is when he was associated with the MSA at UCF, and, saying these things about tawassul and this and that, and somebody tried to encourage me, debate him on Facebook or something. And I engaged in it, thinking, I'm going to raise the banner of haqq and truth and stand up, and, I'm going to shut this takfiri Wahhabi down. But the problem is, of course, these guys don't listen to rational arguments. That's number one. Number two is you'll never ever win an argument online. It's impossible. Both people lose, right? It's never going to happen online. It doesn't work like that. But what I started to notice even within myself is, when I first entered, maybe my niyat was okay. Maybe I was calm. But as I started to type post after post after post, he would reply, then I'd reply back. It literally occupied my mind, my whole day. I'd be trying to offer namaz, and the whole time I'm thinking of replies for this individual. Like, how do I reply back to him? How do I make him look dumb and stupid? My whole day was occupied with this stuff. And this is why in many other ahadith, the Prophet is saying, do not bother yourself with debate and and disputes. It's going to just bother you and take over your mindset. And that's not what you want. What the Ahlul Bayt would do is when they had certain companions, they'd say, look, you Hisham, for example, or you Murara, you can go and debate, for example, the Ahlul Sunnah. You can go and debate the Khawarij. You can use the Quran. You can use our Hadith. They would delegate their students to go and debate. But for the general public, they said, look, you guys don't get involved because you don't have enough information. Your niyat might not be okay. Your heart's going to, be consumed by it, and then you'll end up with nifaq and hatred in your heart. And let's be honest, all of us I think we've reached that point too, where we might start off in a discussion, very calm and trying to listen to the other side. And then we start interrupting and screaming and yelling and then ad hominem and personal insults, attacks and things like this. We lose ourselves very easily. Because at the end of the day, the only person who wins in these sort of debates and discussions is shaitan. Because now he's just broken that connection between two mu'mineen. You go in being mu'mineen, but you come out being enemies. And this is exactly what shaitan wants. And this is exactly what shaitan had done in the point of, in the beginning of his life as well. If we're calling it the beginning of his life. We're talking about the beginning of his screw up. We'll put it like that, right? His problem was with who? Shaitan, Iblis's issue was with Nabi Adam specifically. But that hatred became so much, he's like, it's not now, his problem is not just with Adam. His whole issue is with Banu Adam now. It's now generational hate. Unfortunately, it's, like, Shaitan, what did we do to you? Why are you mad at us? We didn't do anything. But he's like, no, your ancestor, your daddy, he messed everything up, so now I'm going to, try to mess with your guys' lives. This same shaitani mentality existed in these people as well at that time. And that's why they needed to extend their hatred, not just from Imam Ali to everybody below and then everybody above, including Abu Talib. And this is why, even though the history was clear, what they started to do is say, look, if the history is clear, now what we have to do is start to put doubts in people's minds. We have to start meddling and graying up the history. If we can start to put doubts in people's minds, then once they start doubting Abu Talib, then they can start doubting Ali. Once they doubt Ali, then they'll doubt Hasan. Once they doubt Hasan, then they'll doubt Hussein and the rest of them. I think it's a domino effect, upwards and downwards. And the same thing happens with us as well, whether we're talking about, points right now in Shiism in general, right? Certain ideas within our Shia faith, one person calls it into question, things come tumbling down. It might be something that seems, insignificant, right? And then all of a sudden, because of that one little doubt, you're like, oh, I don't even know if God exists anymore. Like, well, how'd you jump over there? You're asking, like, why do we pour water on the grave after somebody's buried? And now you're denying God, like, because there's no reason? Like, what are you saying? But this is the way. Doubts can add up. And when somebody doesn't get the answers that they need, it can turn to hatred. It can turn to hypocrisy. It can turn to nifaq. We have to be very, very careful with this. And besides just the idea of hatred stemming in terms of, or doubt stemming in terms of our aqidah, this can also happen in terms of family relations and community relations, right? One simple expression of hatred will start turning into attacks of whole families, or in this term, clans, right? And now everybody associated, you're going to have a problem with. Again, sometimes it's even small little things. One person in the community, let's say they do something that bothers you, or really, let's say they do dhulm to you. They actually do something which, I don't say is worthy of your hatred, but let's just say, okay, objectively, they really did something which deserved hate. Like, they really did dhulm to you. Okay, fine. What happens when that person's child comes? It's very tough to remove that hatred from your heart and show love to that child. Let's be honest, it's very tough. And that's the power of hatred. It's very tough because why? We see that deep down. We said, look, there is that elder, that person, that parent who has this quality in their heart that led to them doing dhulm to me. We rationalize in the back of our head that this must have come down to their kids as well, so I have a good reason to hate them too. We don't say it out loud, but that's the reason why we can not show them as much love. And then maybe even, hopefully not that person's parents, but sometimes it happens like that as well. So what this example in history shows us is that one thing that we really need to be on alert for is making sure that these types of hatred are completely wiped out and destroyed. And for those who want to hear more about the topic, we addressed this when we analyzed the khutbah of Bibi Zainab alayha salam in, I think this was last Arba'in maybe, around that time we had talked about it. Her khutbah in Kufa, right? Over there, she had talked about this same quality that existed in the people of Kufa. Said, all of your hatred has led you to either physically go out and kill my brother, or you stood around and watched it happen. Regardless, this hatred that you've been having in your heart has been spreading. And now some of you are crying, but that crying is useless because it's nifaq. So we need to make sure that that same spiritual, the negative spiritual characteristic is not within our hearts at all. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Any person who takes an honest look at history, again, they open up the history books, every single thing that Abu Talib did. How could somebody deny that this person wasn't, okay, if you want to deny his iman or his Islam, fine. He was beloved to Rasulullah. Can you keep in your mind, can you have this sort of cognitive dissonance where you say, yes, Rasulullah loved somebody who na'udhu billah is going to go to hell? How do you conceptualize an idea like that? Again, only somebody with some level of stubbornness in their hearts can think of that idea. When we look at the history books and we see when Imam Ali comes and he brings the news to Rasulullah and he says, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. And he shares the sad news of the death of Abu Talib. They say Rasulullah visibly broke down. He ordered Imam Ali, he said, go perform the ghusl, put the kafan, and go and bury Abu Talib. Go bury your father. He said, when you've done all of this, come back to me, and then I will come and see him. And some narrations say that he said just to perform the ghusl and the kafan, then he went to the body. And then when Imam Ali performed everything, he came back, he told Rasulullah. Rasulullah then went in this very, very somber, grieving state towards the body of Abu Talib. And he began reciting all these various lines. And some of them, for example, he said, وَصِلَتْكَ رَحْمٌ يَعَمْ. He says, now mercy has come to you, O my uncle. وَجَزَيْتَ خَيْرًا. And I thank you so much for what you've done for me. فَلَقَدْ رَبَّيْتَ. You acted like a Rabb to me. You nurtured me. You took care of me. You performed the tarbiyah of me. وَكَفَلْتَ صَغِيرًا. You brought me up and supported me when I was young, when no one else did. وَنَصَرْتَ وَأَزَارْتَ كَبِيرًا. You were the one to help me, and you were the one to take care of me when I was all alone, when there was no one else there. And you made sure that from when I was small to when I grew up, you were there the whole time. And then he says these very ajib lines. Ama wallah, I swear to Allah, la astaghfiranna laka. I will perform and recite and ask for so much forgiveness and istighfar for you. وَلَا أَغْشَفَعَنَّ فِيكَ شَفَاعَةً. And I will perform so much shafa'ah for you. يَعْجَبُ لَهَا الثَّقَلَانِ. That both jinn and ins together will be completely amazed at how much forgiveness and shafa'ah I'll be performing for you. Is he going to say this for some random individual? Some person that doesn't accept Islam? It's impossible. When Abdul Muttalib was on his deathbed, because we know that Rasulullah, obviously he had never met his father. He had a very, very difficult upbringing. He never met his father. So he was initially raised by, first they say Halima, then he spent some time with his mother Amina for a few years. Then after Amina passed away, then Rasulullah was placed in the trust of Abdul Muttalib, his grandfather, for, they say, 2 years. Then when he was on his deathbed, this is when now Abdul Muttalib wants to entrust Abu Talib towards Rasulullah. So he calls him, he had all his sons with him. But he said a few things out loud for all the children to hear, but he called Abu Talib close to himself. And he said, I have a very special wasiyat just for you, Abu Talib. He says, this Muhammad over here, he has a very special place in my heart. And there's great things that are destined for him. You must watch over him and take care of him. And when you look at how Abu Talib responds, we'd kind of be shocked that somebody would respond to their father like this. And Abu Talib, and I paraphrase, basically says, how could you say this to me? Ya Abata. He says, don't you know that Muhammad, I will treat him better than my own children. I have more love for him than my own children. And they say this is exactly what happened. Abu Talib, whenever food was on the table and all of his children came, he said, wait for Muhammad to come. None of us will take a bite until Muhammad comes and sits first. When Rasulullah was young, normally, fathers sometimes they will keep their young children with them when they sleep. But he said that he only kept Rasulullah with him, and he would go to sleep and take naps with Rasulullah. And every time he would always mention to the other children, understand who this individual is, understand the greatness behind this personality. And we see this same sort of akhlaq that has been passed down from father to son. And we see the same thing when Imam Ali is reciting his wasiyah. As he mentions his final words, he then calls Abbas to him. He says, Ya Abbas, everyone else, I've called them and I've told them that the imamat will come to Hasan. So I took their hands and I put it in the hands of Hasan. But Ya Abbas, I take your hands and I say, come and put your hands in the hands of my Hussein. Hussein is very, very special to me. He was special to our mother Fatima. He was special to her as well. Make sure you take extra special care and attention to Hussein. Never let him out of your sight. Never let any harm come to him at all. Never let anything happen to him. We can understand when Rasulullah, when Abu Talib passed away, his support passes away. When then he loses Khadija as well, they say that this is his Aam al-Huzn, this is a year of grief for him. And they say Jibreel had come down and said, Ya Rasulullah, leave Makkah because there is no support, there's no nasr for you, there's nothing left for you in Makkah anymore, leave from this place. And we see that, again, this same notion passes down generationally. We see now that same support for Imam Hussein in Karbala. When he's laying at the body of Abbas, his same support, he's there and he's saying, Al-an inkasar al-dhahri. Now, Ya Abbas, Ya Allah, my back has been broken. My support is now gone. Who do I have left for me? There is no one left for me. And that same generational support comes down to the children of Imam Hussein as well, where we say, when Imam Hussein is saying, Hal min nasirin yansuruka? Hal min nasirin yansuruna? Is there anyone left to help me? And this is where some narrations say that now Ali al-Asghar in his cradle is now shaking and crying as if he wants to say, Ya Abata Baba, I am here, I'll be your support when no one else is left to support you. ألا لعنة الله على قوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون رضا بقضائه وتسليما لأمره صلوات على محمد وآل محمد.
मम्माला में अजमातम तमम्माला में अजमातम हुसैन बेकस का हो रहा है तमम्माला हुसैन में अजमातम हुसैन बेकस علمگروں میں سجے ہوئے ہیں دلوں میں فرش عزا بچھا ہے تمام عالم سیاہ کپڑے سیاہ چادر غموں کی گرد و غبار سر پر ہے سوگواروں کے اشک جاری کہ ثانی زہرا بیریدہ ہے تمام عالم نہ چشم پرنام ہو کیوں سوالی جلوس ہے ذوالجناح خالی کہ میرا دلدل سوار مولا زمین کربل میں سو رہا ہے تمام عالم عالم مشق سکینہ دیکھو تو مومنو بس یہ کہہ کے رو لو چچا بھتیجی میں کیا ہے نسبت وفائے عباس کیا وفا ہے تمام عالم مدینے والوں خاموش رہنا غریب زینب سے کچھ نہ کہنا بسا ہوا گھر جو لے گئی تھی وہ کربلا میں اجڑ گیا ہے تمام سنی نہ دیکھی ہے ایسی چاہت حسین زینب کی یہ محبت بہن کے سر پر ردا نہیں ہے تو بھائی بھی بے کفن پڑا ہے تمام سنی نہ دیکھی ہے ایسی چاہت حسین زینب کی یہ محبت بہن کے سر پر ردا نہیں ہے تو بھائی بھی بے کفن پڑا ہے تمام کا ہو رہا ہے علمگروں میں سجے ہوئے ہیں دلوں میں فرش عزا بچھا ہے تمام عالم اجماتم سورۃ مبارکۃ الفاتحہ.
السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين، السلام عليك يا سيد المجتبى، السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله حسين، السلام عليك يا علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى محمد بن علي والحسن بن علي، السلام عليك يا أصحاب العصر والزمان، الأمان الأمان الأمان، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم كل وليك الحجة بن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه بهذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك ثوعا وتمتع يوم فيها طويلا. آمين.